Step out of the car now, or this won't end well for you, Officer Mercer barked, but the man in the suit didn't flinch. Marcus Cole met his glare, calm and steady. Are you sure about that? The man he targets isn't just another driver. He's the one who holds his future in his hands. A routine traffic stop. That's all it was supposed to be. At least that's what Officer Ryan Mercer told himself. Another car, another driver, another moment of authority he didn't expect to be questioned. But this time, things would be different. The sun was setting over the streets of Atlanta, casting an orange glow over the pavement. Cars moved steadily, their headlights flicking on one by one as dusk settled in. A sleek black sedan cruised down Peachtree Street, gliding through the city like it belonged there. Inside, Marcus Cole sat behind the wheel, his hands resting lightly on the leather steering wheel. The day had been long, but familiar. Meetings, reports, discussions about policies, things that came with his position. He was tired but content, ready to head home. Then, the flashing red and blue lights filled his rearview mirror. A sigh escaped his lips. Not again. He slowed, pulling to the side of the road, already knowing how this would go. He'd been through it before, more times than he cared to count. But something about this felt different. Behind him, Officer Mercer adjusted his belt as he stepped out of the patrol car. His grip tightened on his flashlight, his other hand hovering near his holster. His gaze locked onto the sedan, eyes narrowing as he took in the luxury vehicle. Too nice. Too clean. The kind of car that, in his mind, didn't belong to someone like the man behind the wheel. As he approached, he rolled his shoulders back, his posture shifting into something firm, something that said he was in control. He tapped the side of the car. License and registration? Marcus kept his expression calm, his movements deliberate. He reached for the glove compartment, pulling out his documents before handing them over. The officer barely glanced at them before looking back at Marcus, studying him the way one might study a puzzle they didn't think fit together. You know why I stopped you? Marcus met his gaze. I'd like to hear it from you. Mercer's jaw tensed. Something about that answer irritated him. You rolled through that stop sign back there. Marcus knew he hadn't. He also knew arguing wouldn't change a thing. I see, he said simply. Mercer's grip on the license tightened. The name didn't ring any bells. Good. He hated when people tried to pull rank. Step out of the vehicle. Marcus blinked, but his face remained unreadable. Is there a reason? Mercer's lips pressed into a thin line. Because I said so. Marcus exhaled slowly before unlocking the door and stepping out. He was taller than Mercer had expected, standing with the kind of quiet confidence that made him uneasy. Hands where I can see them, Mercer ordered. Marcus complied, keeping his movements slow and controlled. He wasn't afraid. He had dealt with officers like Mercer before. But this wasn't just about him. It was about something bigger, something deeper. Mercer circled him, eyes flicking over his tailored suit, his polished shoes. Not the kind of guy he usually pulled over, not the kind of guy who usually complied so easily. Where are you headed? Home. Mercer's fingers tapped against his holster. That right? Marcus gave a small nod. Mercer could feel the balance shifting, and he didn't like it. This wasn't how these stops were supposed to go. He was supposed to be the one in control. He was supposed to be the one asking the questions, making the rules, but something about this man's calm demeanor, his lack of fear, was unsettling. You seem real sure of yourself, Mercer muttered. Marcus met his gaze, steady and unwavering. I have no reason not to be. Mercer scoffed. Yeah, we'll see about that. He reached for his radio. This wasn't over. Not yet. Officer Mercer kept one hand on his radio, the other still hovering near his holster. His gut told him something was off, something he couldn't put into words. Maybe it was the way Marcus wasn't intimidated. Maybe it was the way he answered each question without hesitation, without fear. But Mercer had seen men like this before, men who thought they were untouchable. He wasn't about to let that slide. You got anything in the car I should know about? His voice was sharp now, pressing for a reaction. No, Marcus answered simply. You sure about that? Yes. Mercer took a step closer. His hand tapped against the roof of the sedan. Mind if I take a look? Marcus tilted his head slightly. Do you have probable cause? The question hit Mercer like a slap. His nostrils flared, but he forced a smirk. Look at you, using legal terms like you know the law. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. Mercer took another step forward, standing just inches away now. He could feel the weight of the silence stretching between them, could feel the power shifting in ways he didn't understand. Turn around, Mercer ordered. Marcus didn't move. I said, turn around, Mercer repeated, his voice tight. Marcus studied him for a moment, then exhaled and slowly turned, placing his hands on the roof of the car. Mercer reached forward, patting him down in quick, firm motions. His hands lingered longer than necessary, as if daring Marcus to react. But there was nothing. No weapon, no drugs, nothing illegal. And yet, Mercer wasn't ready to let this go. You got a record? He asked, stepping back. No. You ever been arrested? No. You ever been in a situation like this before? Marcus turned his head slightly, looking at him over his shoulder. Yes. Mercer clenched his jaw. That wasn't the answer he wanted. The radio on his shoulder crackled to life. Unit 17, status check. Mercer hesitated before pressing the button. Running a check on a driver? Stand by? He pulled out his notepad, flipping it open with exaggerated slowness. Full name? Marcus met his gaze. Marcus Cole. Mercer wrote it down, lips pursed. Occupation? Marcus didn't answer right away. For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable passed across his face. Mercer tapped his pen against the notepad. I asked you a question. Marcus looked him in the eye. You'll find out soon enough. The way he said it sent something cold slithering down Mercer's spine. He clicked his pen shut and reached for his radio again. Dispatch, run a check on a Marcus Cole. There was a pause. Then the reply crackled through the speaker. Repeat that name? Mercer frowned. Marcus Cole, black male, mid-40s. Driving a black sedan. Silence. Then, stand by. Mercer tapped his fingers against his belt as he waited. He had done this 1,000 times before. Run a name, get a report, confirm his suspicions. It was routine. But this time, something felt off. The radio crackled again. Unit 17, confirm the location of this stop. Mercer's stomach twisted. Dispatch never asked that. Peachtree and 10th, he said slowly. Another pause. Then, a voice Mercer didn't recognize came through. Officer Mercer, remain on scene. Do not proceed with further action until instructed. Mercer stiffened. What? The radio was silent. His grip tightened around it. Dispatch, what's going on? Another pause. Then, finally. Officer Mercer, do you know who you just pulled over? Mercer's fingers went numb. His eyes flicked back to Marcus, who was still standing by the car, watching him. The unsettling calm was still there, but now there was something else. Something Mercer couldn't place. The voice on the radio came again, slow and deliberate. That man is the head of internal affairs. Everything inside Mercer froze. Marcus held his gaze, his expression unreadable, and then, finally, he spoke. Now, Officer Mercer, Marcus said smoothly, let's talk about accountability. Officer Mercer's grip on the radio tightened as the words sank in, the weight of them pressing down like a slow, crushing force. His chest felt hot, his throat dry. Internal affairs. The very people who decided which officers kept their badges and which ones didn't. He had stopped plenty of drivers before, gone with his instincts, pressed when he felt like pressing, but this was something else. He had pulled over the man who had the power to end his career with a single report. Marcus didn't move. He didn't smirk, didn't gloat, didn't look at Mercer the way Mercer had looked at him minutes earlier. He just stood there, waiting. Not for an apology, not for an excuse. Just waiting. Mercer shifted on his feet, his mind racing through every decision he had made in the past 10 minutes. He had assumed the car was suspicious. Assumed the man behind the wheel had something to hide. Assumed authority meant control. That control meant power. That power meant no consequences. But now, Consequences were staring him in the face. The radio crackled again. Unit 17, confirm your status. Mercer hesitated, then pressed the button, his voice quieter now. I'm still on scene. Dispatch didn't respond. Marcus finally spoke. You ran my name. You know who I am now, so let me ask you something, Officer Mercer. His voice was calm, measured, but there was a sharpness beneath the surface. Would you have handled this stop the same way if you had known from the start? Mercer opened his mouth, but no words came out. Would you have ordered me out of the car, searched me, treated me like a suspect first and a person second? Marcus's eyes locked onto his, unblinking, unshaken. Or would you have just written the ticket and let me go? Mercer felt something twist deep in his gut. He could deny it, he could say this was just standard procedure, that he followed protocol, that it had nothing to do with race, nothing to do with power, nothing to do with the way he had been trained to see certain people differently than others. But Marcus wasn't asking for a scripted answer. He was asking for the truth. And the truth was, Mercer didn't like what he saw in himself. Marcus exhaled, his expression unreadable. I've seen officers like you my whole life, he said, his voice quieter now. The ones who see a black man in a nice car and assume he doesn't belong in it. The ones who make up a reason to escalate because they don't like being questioned. The ones who don't even realize they're doing it because it's second nature by now. He paused, letting the words sink in. But what happens when you stop the wrong man? When the same system that protects you suddenly turns its eyes on you? Mercer's fingers twitched near his belt, his pulse thudding in his ears. Marcus nodded slightly, as if he could see the storm raging inside him. You feel it now, don't you? He continued. That weight, that fear, that moment when you realize someone else has control over what happens to you next. That's what people like me feel every time we get pulled over. Every single time. Mercer swallowed hard. He had never thought about it like that. He had never had to. The radio crackled again, but Mercer barely heard it. Marcus straightened, adjusting his sleeves like he was done here. I should write you up, he said simply. I should report this. Have you investigated? Make sure every single stop you've made gets looked at under a microscope. He let the words settle before continuing. But I won't, because this isn't about punishment. It's about something bigger. Mercer finally found his voice, though it was quieter than before. What do you want? Marcus studied him for a long moment before speaking. I want you to remember this, he said. Next time you pull someone over, next time you reach for your radio, next time you assume you already know who they are before they even say a word. I want you to remember this moment, the feeling in your chest right now, the way your stomach twists, the way you're second-guessing everything you've done. Mercer swallowed, but said nothing. Marcus turned slightly, glancing toward the city lights in the distance. One report could ruin your career, he said, but change, that's on you. The question is, what kind of officer do you actually want to be? For the first time in years, Mercer didn't have an answer. Officer Mercer stood frozen, his fingers still gripping his belt, his mind reeling. He had spent years believing he understood power, that his badge made him the one in control. But for the first time, he realized control was never really his. It was borrowed, given by a system that had always protected him. And now, that system was watching him through the eyes of a man who had the power to take it all away. Marcus didn't gloat, didn't threaten, didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His words alone carried more weight than any punishment ever could. The radio crackled again, the dispatcher's voice cutting through the silence. Unit 17, status update? Mercer swallowed hard and pressed the button. His voice wasn't as steady as before. Driver is clear. No violations. Resuming patrol. Silence. Then, copy that. Marcus gave a small nod, as if he had expected nothing less. You can go now, Officer Mercer, he said, his tone neutral, unreadable. Mercer's hand twitched, but he didn't move. His feet felt glued to the pavement, his mind spinning through every moment of the past 15 minutes. He had started this stop thinking he was in control, but now he wasn't even sure who he was anymore. Marcus turned slightly, looking at him one last time. Change starts when you decide to see things differently, he said. And the hardest part? That's on you. Then without another word, he stepped back into his car and pulled away. Mercer stood there long after the taillights disappeared down the street. He had a choice to make. He could pretend this never happened, write it off as bad luck, go back to his usual routine. Or he could face what this moment had forced him to see. The next morning, Mercer sat in his patrol car outside the station, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the building as if it held all the answers. He had barely slept. The words Marcus had left him with had played in his mind on a loop louder than anything he had ever heard before. He had spent years thinking he was doing his job the right way. But what if he had been wrong? What if he had been part of the very problem he always told himself didn't exist? He took a slow breath, then reached for his radio. His voice was quiet, but steady. "This is Officer Mercer. I need to speak with Internal Affairs." A pause. Then the dispatcher replied, "Copy, Officer Mercer. Connecting you now." He didn't know what he would say. He didn't know where this would lead. But for the first time, he knew he had to find out. The badge doesn't make the man, the choices do. There are moments in life that force us to look at ourselves, to see beyond what we've always believed. Some people ignore them, others face them head on and change for the better. If this story made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe in fairness, respect, and accountability, be the person who stands for it, no matter where you are. Subscribe for more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us of the power of doing what's right.